Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for being here. It's so awesome to say that I actually have a listenership, that the Grace and Grit podcast has people who consistently come back to listen to this show. It's such a cool thing. So thank you for being here. I hope you get a lot out of today's show. I also hope that you are fiercely committing to enjoying these last few weeks of summer, especially coming off of our theme from last month, which was Best Summer Ever. I know for me personally, I have a lot going on in my life right now, especially a lot of business projects for things that we are planning on kind of launching in the fall, which is very exciting. But given that, I'm also deeply committed to really enjoying these last few weeks of summer and really being as present as I can possibly be with my son, with my life during these really special days. I hope you are too. Now, we are embarking on a new month, which means we have a new theme. And I'm really excited to tell you that our theme for this month is going to be Principles of Deep Health. Why did I choose this theme? So many reasons. Here are just a few. First of all, I feel like deep health is such an important conversation that just needs to be had way more frequently. Like we need to be having this conversation far more frequently. Because deep health is so much more than what diet culture is offering women, which in my humble opinion is largely kind of superficial health, if you can even call it health at all. Because a lot of the types of things that diet culture promotes is actually depleting women of health, not promoting it. And if women do achieve a certain degree of health by following certain diet plans, I don't believe it's deep health. And I hope you'll understand why I say that by the end of this podcast today. And one of my biggest bones to pick with the diet industry is that, they're largely serving cookie cutter protocols and systems that do not take the unique individual into consideration. And of course, that's problematic for really creating deep health in an individual. So that's partly why I chose this theme, is to speak to all of that. The other reason that I chose this theme is I feel that I have long been a fish swimming upstream with my messaging around women's health, what it is, and what it takes to achieve it. And many of you who've been longtime listeners know that I don't sell the sexy stuff, right? I don't sell the 21-day programs, the quick fixes, the detoxes, the, bikini ready body by June. I don't stand for any of that stuff. Sometimes I wish that I didn't know what I know or believe what I believe, because I could probably make a lot more money selling things like that, because those types of programs, women are buying in droves. But it's not at all what I believe. And I think it's really important from time to time to remind you, the listener, and remind myself about what it is I do stand for. So that is part of my intention behind this podcast theme. And the other reason, and there's more reasons, but the other reason I'll mention today is that this fall, we have so many opportunities coming up to work with me. We have free offerings. We have some really incredible programs. We have just some really exciting things in the works. And I just think this is such a timely place to reintroduce people to what Grace and Grit is, the sort of the philosophy behind Grace and Grit, what it is I as a health coach stand for, and what I believe deep health actually is. Because in diet culture, even in sort of the fitness space, the wellness space, we are promoting health as a lot of action, right? Do these things, exercise in this way, eat on this protocol, get this many hours of sleep, all of the rest of it. And while I believe, of course, action is how we create results in our life, far too often we're overlooking how we're thinking. And thinking is at the root of how we're behaving. And so I talk a lot about this on the podcast, but I just want to reiterate that in the theme this month. So what you're going to hear me talking about, the principles of deep health, are not necessarily action steps, although I will be giving you some tips on moving in the direction of helping to develop deep health for you. But it's really a way of thinking about health that I want to help to maybe shift for some of you that might be new to the show, or just fortify for those of you who've been around for a while. So let's start with just getting clear on what I mean when I say deep health. I am definitely not the first person to use this phrase, but I don't see it used all that often. And so I just want to be very clear about the context in which I'm using the phrase deep health, all right? So deep health in my world, in the work that I do as a health coach, is ultimately creating a state of being in a person where they are able to easily and consistently honor the needs of their mind, body, and soul. And they do it out of the respect that they have for themselves as a human being, and out of respect for what they are here to cause, contribute, and inspire in the world. Deep health is also, really a state of a person lining up their actions with what they say it is they truly want for their life. In other words, a person in a state of deep health is in integrity with themselves. Their actions are lined up with who they say they want to be. Deep health, interestingly, is a state that I believe no one can ultimately quantify or measure but you. It's about getting deeply honest with yourself. Now, please don't hear me say that I don't think blood profiles and hormone panels and other Western medicine measurements of health aren't important. Of course I do. But they are not definitive of my take on deep health. Because a hormone panel doesn't necessarily take into consideration somebody's integrity with themselves, right? A blood profile doesn't necessarily reflect that somebody is honoring their mental and spiritual needs. Deep health is ultimately the result of how you decide to take care of yourself mentally, physically, and even spiritually. And it's only created by having a willingness to get to know yourself on a very intimate level and fiercely commit to developing yourself into the best version of yourself that you can be. Deep health is the result of granting yourself permission to grow, expand, and evolve as a human being. So today, I really want to talk about that last part, which is deep health being the result of granting yourself permission to grow, expand, and evolve as a human being. So I titled today's episode, Deep Health is a Practice of Expansion. So first of all, the reason I say practice is because practice implies consistency. A practice is something that we do habitually. It's a way of life. Again, the diet culture treats health like it's a destination to arrive at. And I've long preached that I don't believe that. I believe health is a journey. It is a way of life. It is a culmination of your habits. I also like the word practice because it kind of allows us to let go of timelines a little bit. So we're not so concerned with reaching a certain result in 30, 90, or 120 days. Because if we're committing to a way of life, why does the timeline really matter? Now, the reason I emphasize expansion is because diet culture suggests that health is a result or results in a particular look. And to reach a particular look or a particular weight or a particular aesthetic, you really need to restrict yourself. The primary message a lot of women hear is eat less to literally become less, right? Now, when I say become less, I'm literally speaking to weight loss. Okay? Eat less to become less. And the crazy thing is we hear that, it sounds awful, but we buy it in droves, right? The diet industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Women not only restrict food in extreme ways, like we remove entire food groups, we have really radical philosophies around dieting, but they also are equating how they look with their self-worth. And so they're often restricting things like self-respect and self-love and joy and happiness and living life full out until they reach that particular weight, that particular look, right? That aesthetic measurement. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Health is not a look. Heavier women can absolutely be healthy, and thin women can be riddled with illness. Just as health comes in all shapes and sizes, so does disease. So cultivating a state of deep health does not require weight loss, although it might. Weight loss certainly may be a part of the journey to deep health for some women. But weight loss alone will never create a state of deep health. I have worked with so many women who have achieved weight loss, but never achieved the things that I mentioned in the definition of deep health earlier. So I've worked with women who have gone through lots of diets where they've lost weight, but they never learned how to be consistent about honoring the needs of their mind, body, and soul, which is why they have to keep dieting. They also did not pursue the weight loss out of respect that they have for themselves as human being, but rather out of trying to get the right opinion from those around them, right? They were seeking out the approval of other people. And they most certainly weren't taking better care of themselves, or I shouldn't even say taking better care of themselves, because that's not even synonymous with dieting. But a lot of women will diet not in tribute to what they are here to cause, contribute, and inspire, but as a way to kind of beat themselves up, right? For not being enough. I've worked with many women over the years who had lost weight multiple times, who were most definitely not in integrity with themselves, and most certainly not at peace with who they were. So I'm telling you this because weight loss is not synonymous with health, most definitely not deep health. Weight loss can be a very healthy thing. It can also be a very toxic thing. It really depends on how you're going about it. Are you going about it from a space of self-loathing and being driven by other people's opinions? And from a space of restriction, not just of food, but literally restricting your life until you reach your goal, to me, that is a very toxic space to be trying to achieve health from. Health will never be born from a toxic space. Another thing I just want to drive home here is that not all bodies need to get smaller in order to achieve deep health. Case in point is myself. I've shared this story before, but continuing to get smaller was actually a very unhealthy thing for me in so many ways, right? My whole life kind of at one point revolved around meticulously being accountable to everything that went in my mouth, to the point that I was kind of really missing out on other aspects of my life. I was losing energy because I was literally, I was not fueling my body. I didn't have as much movement capacity. Like my movement practice was struggling because I didn't have what I needed to show up for it in terms of energy and muscle and just excitement. So personally, I needed to expand both mentally and physically in order to find a state of deep health for myself. I would argue that all women could benefit from learning how to expand mentally to create deep health. And I'm going to talk about that more here in a second. But do you need to expand physically? I don't know. But to be constantly in pursuit of thinness or smallness, because that's what diet culture preaches, I think is insane. Dr. Colleen Reichman does amazing work around eating disorders and disordered eating. And you can follow her on Instagram. I might have to leave her handle in the notes for you to follow because I don't have her handle right here. But I did come across a quote of hers recently that I absolutely loved. She said this. She said, bodies aren't meant to stay exactly the same. Can we please stop putting pressure on folks in their 30s, 40s, and 50s to look like they did in their 20s? Because essentially it's putting pressure on people to defy biology. And yet I see so many women saying that they're chasing health, they're pursuing health, when really all they're doing is pursuing smallness, right, of body size. So let's talk a little bit more about restriction for a second, because again, restriction is the opposite of expansion. Restriction is something that limits, like a rule or a law, right? And boy, does the diet industry have a lot of rules and regulations. Now, of course, diets restrict food to extremes, right? Calories. I always share the story that so many women come into me, working with me, that are already in such a calorie deficit. And they cannot wrap their head around why they are feeling so lousy, they're losing all their muscle, and they're in hormonal chaos. And they expect that we're going to drop calories further because that's what the diet industry has trained them to do, is to keep restricting. If you're not getting the result you want, restrict more. So restriction, in my mind, is really kind of extreme, especially in the diet industry. So while we do, many women, I shouldn't say we, because I really worked hard to get out of that space, but while many women still are in this mentality of restriction to create a state of health, I also see diets kind of developing this mindset in women that they also need to deny, detach, and punish themselves. And they use restriction to do that, right? So we're not just denying ourselves food, but women are denying themselves that they are unique individuals that deserve more than somebody's cookie cutter protocol. Diet culture teaches us to detach from ourselves. So when we follow someone else's system, plan, protocol, a lot of times we're losing touch with what our body is asking or how it's responding. So we're losing communication with ourselves, which is never a healthy thing. And many, many women restrict food, self-love as punishment for being less than they think they're supposed to be, or for being too much. Deep health will never be the result of these things. It will never be the result of extreme restriction. It'll never be the result of denying, detaching, or punishing yourself. Deep health is not a practice of restriction. It is a practice of expansion. So what exactly is expansion? Well, Google says that it is to become larger or more expansive. And the synonym, which I absolutely adore, is growth. Deep health is all about growth. So when I think of expansion or growth as it directly relates to my health, I think about increasing my capacity for self-respect, ultimately for self-love, for forgiveness. I expand my capacity for curiosity about myself, for expression through my creativity. I think about increasing my capacity for confidence, new possibility, movement, communication with myself and with others. I think about increasing my capacity for taking action, for being of service. When I think about increasing my capacity for things, for growing into all of those things, it makes me so excited. And you know what makes you feel wildly expansive and encourages growth? Love. And you know what makes you feel incredibly restricted? Is fear. And I would say that the diet industry is largely fear-based. You're not living up to a social standard, so you must restrict. If you think about it, restriction is killing us. We're restricting nourishment, not just from food, but our modern day lives are restricting us from sleep, from play, from introspection, from social connection. And I know what so many of you are going to say, but Courtney, I really do want to lose weight to honor my body because I think I'll feel better and do better in life. Isn't that restriction? In order to lose weight, I need to eat less. Isn't that restriction? And here's my answer to that. It really depends on your intention behind it. So like I said before, restriction as a form of denial, detachment, or punishment will never foster a state of deep health. The only thing restriction will do is bring out your inner toddler, right? You will rebel every step of the way. You will put your foot down. You will hate doing the work. You might do it. You might force your way through it, but you're not going to be happy about it. And because no one likes being restricted, eventually you're going to grow weary of that battle. And so you're just going to go back to your old behavior and you'll just stay in that spin cycle for years, decades, maybe your whole life. But setting boundaries with yourself and with others, in my opinion, is a form of love that can most certainly help you to cultivate a state of deep health. In fact, I would say that boundaries with yourself and others is a requirement for deep health. You can give yourself permission to expand as a human and set boundaries out of self-love rather than self-hate simultaneously. You can do both of those things at the same time. So think of parenting, right? I always love this analogy because I feel like it makes it so clear. When we parent, we are definitely we definitely have our child's best interest at heart. We want to see them expand into incredible humans, to be the best they can be. And a part of parenting to allow them to expand into the best versions of who they can be is setting some boundaries. Right? We teach our kids boundaries at a very early age. This behavior is not acceptable, right? This is not okay for this reason. And we don't do it out of hate or out of a space of fear, although that's probably not true. I think some parenting is definitely based in fear. But the high hope and really the intention for most parents is to do it out of a space of love. We teach our children boundaries out of love. And that's what I encourage all of my clients to do. Don't restrict yourself from a place of hate. Set a boundary from a space of self-love. And maybe for you, this is just semantics and it all means the same thing for you. And that's fine. But for me and so many of the women I work with, this stuff really matters. Just asking yourself the question, right now along your health journey, or whatever change you're trying to make along your health journey, are you doing it from a space of restriction, from a place of self-loathing, or are you setting boundaries because you love yourself and your life so deeply? There's a big difference. So I want to offer you one other thought here. I strongly believe, after 20 years of working with women to improve their health, that most of the expansion work that needs to be done to help us create deep health is in our thinking. It really is. And you've heard me talk about this a lot in the podcast over, the past couple of years. But I just keep emphasizing it more and more because it really is the root of so many of our behavior challenges, is how we're thinking. Diet and exercise programs often don't address our thinking, right? They're all wrapped up in taking action. But without expanding your thinking along the way to improving your health, you will find that sustainability is impossible. Because your thinking is really what drives your emotions and your feelings. And your emotions and your feelings are either going to get you to show up to do the work that you want to be doing for yourself, or your feelings are going to cause you to not show up to do any work. And of course, the work that you do or the work that you don't do is going to be your results. Again, for years, I did this as a coach where I just focused on giving my clients the action plan. This is what we're going to eat. This is how you're going to exercise. This is how many hours of sleep you're going to get, how much water you're going to drink, right? But ultimately, what I learned is it's not enough. Those action steps are totally pointless if someone does not change the way they are thinking, which again is my whole purpose of this podcast today, to just emphasize that deep health is a practice of expansion, and it begins in your head. I hope this landed. I hope someone had an aha moment with this podcast today, just thinking about the difference of moving along your journey in dedication to expansion rather than restriction. Thinking bigger, maybe physically becoming bigger. I don't know. I don't know your health, your body type, I don't know any of that. But having this just one dimension of the conversation that it's always about a certain look, it's always about a certain size, it's always, a certain weight range is not serving you. It's restricting you from living your life in a really peaceful way. Only you can decide what boundaries need to be set. But when boundaries are set, remember, boundaries are about love, not about self-loathing, not about trying to win the approval of other people, not trying to fit yourself in a cultural standard. So let me know if this resonated for you. You can always email me, Courtney@graceandgrit.com. As of next week, we will have registration up and running for our 5 to Thrive event, which is our free 5-day event that will run the first week of September. Super pumped about it. So I'll give you all the registration details next week. If you're on our email list, that is another way you'll get notified. You can always head over to the website, graceandgrit.com, to register for our email list. And this month's roadmap will be available likely next week. We're always aiming for the second or third week of the month. It really is just dependent on when everyone can get their parts together. So my hope is to have it for you next week. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.